Well, it is a real treat to be with you all this afternoon and to have this opportunity to think together about the connection between harmony and Christian Science healing. I imagine all of us have had a desire to see harmony more fully expressed in our lives, maybe in our relationships, or perhaps in our communities. Just a deeper yearning to see harmony in our communities, or perhaps in the body, in the form of better health. What we're going to look at this afternoon is how Christian Science can help us to recognize that harmony is actually already the established fact, instead of being a fleeting mortal condition that sometimes we fall out of or feel like we've fallen out of. Other times we're feeling like we're trying to get back into it. That's because harmony is really a law of God. It's a spiritual law, which means it's based on a fixed principle. Now think about that for a moment. If this law of harmony is based on a fixed principle, it indicates that it's constant and consistent. So there's actually no possibility of finding yourself somehow outside of that law. Now, Mary Baker Eddy's discovery of this science of Christ healing has been showing folks that harmony is really the only true condition of man. And her textbook here, along with the Bible, along with the Scriptures, but this book in particular, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, has been helping me and really folks all throughout the world to better understand God and to better understand those laws of God, those spiritual laws that can practically and consistently be brought to bear in our lives through prayer in a way that leads to healing. So that's where we're going to go today. That's what we're going to talk about. And to start off, I just want to share an experience that I had that I think will help illustrate this idea of the consistency of harmony. I served in the military a number of years back, and during that time I was selected to go through the Army's Ranger School. Anybody heard of Ranger School? Anybody familiar with it? A few of you? Okay, a number of you. Well, for those who maybe aren't as familiar, Ranger School is primarily a leadership course. It's designed to help those who go through it be more effective at leading under some fairly challenging circumstances. And the Ranger instructors are quite capable of making that course challenging. They're very good at it. It's about a 2-month-long class or course, and it involves a lot of different aspects, one of which is very little sleep, another is very little food, while still needing to complete a number of challenging tasks in order to get from one phase to the next. Now, the first week is meant to be really a physical and mental test to make sure those who are there are prepared to continue on. And a lot of people don't make it past that first week. So those of us who did, those of us who were continuing on, probably felt a little bit like me, just mentally, physically exhausted at that point, really not feeling a whole lot of harmony. One of the Ranger instructors told us that those of us that were continuing, that there was going to be a church service offered, and anybody that wanted to could attend. It was going to be a non-denominational Christian service, and some rumors started going around amongst the guys that at the end of that service there may be a little communion activity, which would include a little glass of grape juice and a slice of bread. And you can imagine, after the lack of food that we had, how exciting that was. And I'm pretty sure every single one of us, regardless of faith tradition or how we landed on that, I'm pretty sure every single one of us showed up to that service. And we did have a communion. It was nourishing in all the ways, in all the right ways. Now, I actually don't recall a whole lot about that church service. But there's one moment that I will probably never forget. It was an incredibly special moment for me. We were singing hymns together, and I remember during this hymn we were singing, it was kind of a bluegrassy gospel song. And while we were singing together, I felt an incredible sense of love just envelop me. And I recognized really intuitively that this was not just a human emotion that I was feeling, but was really the love of God that I was feeling. And I can't tell you exactly how good that felt at that particular moment. It helped me see that it didn't matter where we are in our life. It doesn't matter how far outside of normal we feel like we've ended up. That love of God is right there, tangible to us. In fact, it helped me realize that I had actually been approaching Ranger School in a way that was probably making it a little bit more difficult for myself. I had started to believe that in order to get myself to the end of this course, I needed to be not only strong enough to endure the challenges to get to the end, but I needed to be smart enough. I needed to be strategic enough to plan a route to the end of this course. And it started to feel like quite a burden for me. And this sense, this little moment, this little church service moment that I was feeling really shifted my thought on that. I realized instead of trying to humanly push my way forward, push my way to the end of this course, that what I really could do was to let that love that I was feeling so tangibly at that moment, to hold on to that, to let that love actually permeate every aspect of my thought and my action and lead me forward, guide me forward. And I realized I actually made a little commitment to myself to not worry about how I was going to get to the end of this course or if I was going to get to the end of this course, but just to let that love shine through my every thought and action as best as I could. And in fact, it opened up a whole new path, you could say, for me. And I found myself in a position not only to be a blessing to others, but to really feel blessed by others as well. I did make it to the end of that course. I wish I could stand here and tell you that it was all breezy, easy after that. It certainly wasn't. It was still one of the most challenging things I've ever done. But I will say that it was so much more harmonious from that point forward. And I think I took away some incredibly valuable lessons from it. Now, I have thought about that experience, that church service moment, quite a bit over the years. And I have really come to see that moment as a glimpse of heaven. Now, if you're familiar with the four Gospels in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you probably remember that Jesus talks a lot about the kingdom of heaven. At one point, he says, don't look out there somewhere for heaven. Don't look over here, don't look over there, because the kingdom of heaven, it's at hand. And in that context, at hand really means it's right here and right now. So it's not something only attainable after death. It's a here and now experience. In fact, another place he says the kingdom of heaven is actually within you. I've really come to see heaven more as a conscious awareness of our unity with God, our connection to that love, our inseparable connection to God's love. Mary Baker Eddy, she refers to heaven at one point as the harmony of being. And I love how that correlates so clearly with Jesus' own statement about the kingdom of heaven being within you, not something out there, intangible, later, but right here and now. And I think I was just starting to glimpse that from this little church service experience. And learning how to see that was with more consistency in my life. In fact, I've thought about this statement that Paul makes at the end of chapter 8 in Romans, where he says that I am persuaded, he's convinced, that there's actually nothing that can separate us from the love of God. And he lists off a whole slew of things that try to make us feel like we've been separated from God's love. But I think I was feeling just a little bit of that sense, just a glimpse of what Paul was feeling so persuaded by that there was actually nothing that could separate us from God's love. And I think that's absolutely true for each one of us. We can feel and really capture that essence of what Jesus was saying about the kingdom of heaven, the reign of harmony, right here and now. Not something far off, not something we fall out of, but constant and consistent right here and now. Well, I want to transition here for a moment and talk about this term, Christian Science. It's a term that I think sometimes people have a hard time reconciling, and I can understand why. You know, something that's Christian is quite spiritual. And, you know, often people think or attribute science to something that's physical. So I want to look at why Mary Baker Eddy used that phrase to describe this very spiritual discovery that she made about these laws of God. We'll start by looking at the Christian side of things and then talk about how it's scientific. So first off, Christian Science is very much Christian. It's Christian in that it recognizes that there's just one God. This God is supreme good. It is the only cause. You could think of God as a fixed principle of love, governing every aspect of the universe. There's a lot of ways to describe the nature of this all-good God. But there's just one God that's all good. Okay, and then there's just one Christ. This Christ you can think of really as the highest expression of God's spiritual idea. The highest expression of God's spiritual man or idea. I'm going to come back and actually talk about the Christ a little bit further in a moment. But for now, just one God, all good, one Christ, that highest expression of God's spiritual idea. And then you've got this phrase that the Bible uses, the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit. Now think of the Holy Spirit really as the Word of God, or you could say the law of God. And that Word of God or that law of God can tangibly and practically be brought to bear in human consciousness through prayer, through a really holy or inspired prayer that recognizes no opposite to this all-good God, nothing opposed to this divine love. And that prayer transforms consciousness in a way that naturally leads to harmony and healing. So jumping back to the Christ for a moment, I want to unpack this a little further because I think it'll help us as we continue on here. One of the ways I like to think about the nature of the Christ is actually in a statement that Jesus makes. He was speaking to a larger audience, and I think he was trying to illustrate something of what his mission was, who he was and what he was about. But he makes a very bold statement to this crowd, and sometimes I wish I could have just been there to see the reaction. But he says to this group, "Before Abraham was, I am." Now, all of the folks there that he was speaking to would have recognized that Abraham was a Jewish patriarch that came 2,000 years prior to everybody, all these guys. And so you can imagine, to many of their ears, they're probably hearing this young rabbi, this 30-year-old or so teacher, say in effect that he's over 2,000 years old. Can you imagine what they must have thought of him at that moment? But I have to imagine there were a few in that group, in that crowd, that really caught the essence of what he was getting at. I don't think that Jesus was talking about him personally coming before Abraham, but I think he was referring to the nature of the Christ, that the Christ is actually throughout all time. It's not confined to a specific geographic location or a time or event in human history, but that the Christ is throughout all time. Now, Mary Baker Eddy refers to the Christ at one point as a divine influence, ever present in human consciousness. She also talks of the Christ as being a message from God, speaking right to our hearts speaking to us in a way that we can understand, in a way that makes sense to us. So Christ is this divine influence speaking to us, revealing our nature as spiritual, as good, as pure, innocent, and whole. And Jesus is the man that best expressed that Christ nature, expressed it better than anybody ever has. In fact, it's the reason that folks all around the world, Christians all around the world, think of Christ Jesus as the way. Okay, so we've kind of covered the Christian part of Christian Science. Now, what about this science? Now, science is something that's based on a methodology, ultimately, right? It's something that's going to be provable and repeatable. It's something based on evidence, something that can be demonstrated. And what Mary Baker Eddy was seeing was that there were tangible spiritual laws that could actually be brought to bear through prayer in a way that consistently led to healing in people's lives. She really saw that there was a science to Jesus' healing ministry. In fact, she referred to it as the science of Christ healing. Provable, repeatable laws that can be applied through prayer and understood. Now, sometimes folks, they wonder if this discovery that she made, which was really a discovery of universal laws of God that aren't applicable just to some, but apply broadly to everyone. Sometimes people wonder if that discovery was kind of happened in one grand moment in her life. And it really didn't go down that way. It really happened as a moment-by-moment unfolding throughout her life. In fact, I will say there was a specific point in the mid-1860s that she really began to discern that these laws of God really were based on a fixed principle. And I think that was a turning point in this discovery for her. In fact, people in the little community that she lived in, which was outside of Boston, Massachusetts, began to think of her and refer to her as a Christian healer because of the consistent healing that was going on in their community through her prayers. Now, one time she was asked to help a woman that was dying of pneumonia. Now, this woman had been seen to by a number of different physicians up to that point, all of whom were earnestly working to help her, to save her. The last man that was helping her was a man named Dr. Davis, and he was considered the lead physician in that community. And he, after doing everything he could for the woman, felt that the case was too far along, that there was nothing more he could do, and he told the family that they should prepare for her to pass on quite soon. Now, one of the young men in that family had actually heard of this Christian healer woman, Mary Baker Eddy, and suggested that maybe they could get in touch with her and see if she could help. And the family agreed, so he reached out, and she actually came to the house right away. They had put a chair up next to the woman's bed where she was resting. And Mrs. Eddy went upstairs. She was still resting. She just sat quietly in that chair and prayed earnestly to God for this woman. And within moments, that woman was totally cured. She was completely restored to health in just those few minutes. She actually was able to get up, dress herself. She went downstairs to meet the family, who was, of course, overjoyed to see such an immediate turnaround to health. They had a meal together. Now, this event happened so quickly that Dr. Davis hadn't had a chance to leave yet. He was actually still in the room and witnessed the whole thing. And after the woman went downstairs, he walked up to Mrs. Eddy and said, "How did you do that?" And she said to him very honestly that she wasn't exactly sure of the method, but she knew that God had done the work, knew that God had done the healing. And I think she wanted to point him, instead of feeling like she saw this as a special gift that she had, I think she wanted him to understand that it was really based on a fixed principle. Well, he implored her to figure it out, whatever it was, figure it out, get it written down and published so that it could be shared with the world. Because whatever this was that he saw, he recognized that the world needed it. Mrs. Eddy went home that evening, and as she would often do, she would open her Bible and find inspiration, insight, guidance. And this particular evening, she opened the Bible, and it opened to the middle, the Old Testament chapter of Jeremiah. And what she read was the second verse of chapter 30. And here's what it says. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, write in a book all the words that I have spoken to you. I find that quite intriguing, that it correlated so naturally with Dr. Davis's imploring her to figure this out, get it written down, and share it with the world. And yet it also correlated with an intuition that Mrs. Eddy had as a young girl, that at some point in her life, her intuition was that she would end up writing a book. Well, she really devoted the rest of her life, but specifically the next several years, to, as she would later say, finding the positive rule to this science of Christ healing, or this prayer-based system of healing. She dove deep into the Bible, specifically into Jesus' accounts of healing, finding that positive rule. And the culmination of that work was the first edition of this book in 1875. That's over 142 years ago, almost 143 years ago now, that folks have been turning to their Bibles and to science and health and finding truly life-transforming ideas, finding healing, finding spiritual insights about the nature of God, about the nature of man. In fact, there's a chapter, the very last chapter in Science and Health is called Fruitage, and it's full of little snippets or excerpts of longer letters of gratitude that Mrs. Eddy received over the years from people that had found Science and Health, and as they were reading, the ideas shifted or transformed their thought in a way that led to healings of all different types. Now, some of those folks actually told her that they were deeply skeptical when they started reading that book. In fact, a number of them said that they had only picked up the book because they wanted to prove it wrong. And yet, even then, these ideas touched them in a way that led to significant healing and transformation in their life. You know, I want to share a little example of a healing that I had, and more important to me than the physical healing that took place, ended up being the concept that I got about how all healing in Christian Science works. So, a number of years ago, I was with some friends in Washington State out at a lake, and there was a little lake house out there, and we were spending some time together out there, and we were going to go swimming. There was a dock that ran out into the lake. What I didn't realize, though, was that the lake, the water was a bit lower than it normally was for that time of year. And I ran to the end of that dock, dove straight into the water, and abruptly met the bottom of the lake, the rocks on the bottom of the lake, with my face. I came up out of the water, after double checking to make sure all my teeth were where they were supposed to be, everything seemed to check out, be in order. I felt impelled, really, to just take a pause, take a beat there, and wanted to feel something of that love, that connection to divine love that I had felt during that Ranger School church service experience. And so as I was just opening my thought in prayer to the allness of God, that I couldn't fall outside of that love of God, this concept came to me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it actually correlated with a statement that Mary Baker Eddy makes in her textbook here. But what came to me was that in the infinite order and allness of God, there was no chance, and there could be no accidents. And that made a lot of sense to me. I later read, that correlating idea where she talks about how we can mentally change the notion of chance to a proper sense of God's unerring direction, and that doing this brings out harmony. Well, as I was thinking about that idea, the order, the allness of God, how there could be no chance, no accident, I just felt a real sense of comfort in that. I did, however, notice that I was bleeding a little bit, and I didn't have any pain, so I kind of made an assumption that maybe I had a bloody nose or something, and I figured I'd go up to the house and get myself cleaned up. When I walked into the bathroom up there and I saw myself in the mirror, I was actually quite startled. What was looking back at me. It wasn't a bloody nose. I actually had 2 deep cuts on my face. And all that peace, all that sense of joy and harmony that I had been feeling just started to evaporate. And fear was kind of crawling in, you might say. And my thought started to go to some of the experiences I had had overseas with my platoon and how we had had to deal and treat similar conditions and wounds. And I knew that conventional wisdom here was that stitches were probably an appropriate next step. But I had seen all throughout my life the effectiveness of turning to God in prayer and the consistent healings that had come about from that. Now, I didn't have a problem going and getting stitches, but I also could trust, and I really was trusting, that God could so perfectly guide me in whatever was going to be the most helpful and useful next steps here. And I knew that to feel that shepherding, to feel that guiding, I needed my thought to be open and receptive to that. And so I just began to pray again, right there where I was in the bathroom. And it wasn't anything out loud or verbal. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of the presence of God, and that I could hear that divine influence shepherding me forward. Now, interestingly, as I was kind of opening my thought here, the same concept that had come to me down at the lake about the order and allness of God and how no accidents or chance were a part of that order came back to me. And I'll admit, I had a little bit harder time reconciling that now. Intellectually I got it, but then I thought, yeah, but I can stand up and look in the mirror and see the results of an accident. How is that possible? And then this thought struck me, and it came as a question. It was, Josh, what do you think you are? And for a moment, I thought about the body. And I realized that's actually a very limited and limiting way to think of oneself. In fact, if any one of us were going to try to describe ourselves to somebody over the phone, maybe we've never seen them or met them or they us, and all we did was share some physical attributes, that would really be not very helpful in them getting to know something about us. And I realized that what we really need to know to get to know who and what we are is more about our character. And behind that character are qualities. And those qualities actually have their source in God. And then this little Bible phrase, very small idea about God from the book of John came to me. It was just simply, God is spirit. And I thought how that correlated with a statement way at the beginning of the Bible, where it talks about man being made in the image and likeness of God. And so I thought, man is made in the image and likeness of spirit, which means that man is spiritual. My substance is spiritual, right here and now. And as I thought about that, this flood of qualities that God was uniquely expressing through me came to my consciousness. And then this light went on in my thought, and I realized that's why in the infinite order and allness of God, there could be no accident, there could be no chance, because those qualities that God was expressing uniquely and continuously through me those qualities could never have crashed into the bottom of some lake. Those qualities couldn't become broken. They couldn't become cut, destroyed, harmed in any way, shape, or form. That was a profound revelation to my thought. I mean, these weren't brand new concepts to me, but they hit me in such a new way that my substance was spiritual, right here and now. It wasn't a mixture of matter and spirit now, hoping that I could become spiritual down the road sometime, but that was my true substance, right here and now. And I felt a shift, a profound shift in my thought. And I really felt that a healing had taken place. Now, not a whole lot had changed on the surface. The bleeding had stopped. I mean, that really was just a few minutes in the bathroom. The bleeding had stopped in that time, and I felt that that was a wonderful sign of progress. And I felt completely safe to continue cherishing this new sense of God as infinite spirit and as of myself as the expression of infinite spirit. Myself as spiritual. I went to bed just holding to those ideas, and when I woke up in the morning, those cuts had closed up nicely, and within about 4 or 5 days, all evidence of that incident was completely gone and healed. I will say I was quite impressed at how fast the physical healing came about. But I became so much more interested and excited about what it told me about the nature of all healing in Christian Science. Healing in Christian Science isn't about fixing up broken bodies. It's about a transformation, or you could say a reformation of thought. And as thought moves spiritward, or as Mrs. Eddy says, as thought becomes spiritualized, the body follows it to a better expression of harmony. That's because the body is actually unintelligent. It doesn't do anything on its own. It simply follows where consciousness goes. So when thought is moving spiritward, becoming spiritualized, the body actually has no choice but to follow it to a better expression of harmony. Now we think of that and call it healing, and it is, but it's actually the most natural outcome or effect of this spiritualization of thought. Another way to think about this is in a statement that Jesus makes. In the book of John, he says, "I am the light of the world. He that follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Now think about what happens during a sunrise. When the sun comes up and that light is dawning across the landscape that was maybe dark and obscured, when that light is dawning across that landscape, it's not creating the landscape anew, it's revealing it, right? That light is revealing what's actually always been there. Now think again about what Jesus said. He said, "I am the light of the world." Isn't he really referring to the nature of the Christ? That the Christ, or that divine influence, reaching us, revealing to us our true nature, our spiritual nature, isn't doing something new, isn't creating something new in us. It's simply revealing what's always been true about us. It's revealing your purity. It's revealing your wholeness, your innocence, your goodness. It's revealing those spiritual qualities that constitute your actual substance. And as that revealing is taking place, thought is moving spiritward. And again, the most natural outcome of that spiritualization of thought is healing. I was sharing some of these concepts, some of these ideas with a friend of mine who was interested in Christian Science, and he was really intrigued. He was really liking our conversation and what was unfolding. But he stopped me at one point and he said, "Hold on, I got to understand this. Are you just super optimistic or something? Do you just have a really, really good positive attitude? Because there's a lot of inharmony that I see out there. A lot of bad stuff going on in the world. Do you just kind of ignore that and stay positive? I thought that's a very fair question. And there's certainly nothing wrong with having an optimism or a positive human outlook in life, but that's not what Christian Science is about. In fact, that's not what Christianity as a whole is about. It's not about having just a positive human spin on things. Christian Science actually helps bring human consciousness in line with the divine reality, which is the only reality. You know, I knew that he was familiar with the Bible, and so it felt natural to share with him one of the ways that Jesus handled this issue, talked about this concept. Jesus says that evil is a lie with no truth in it. Now, most translations of the Bible refer to that as the devil, that the devil is a liar, the father of lies with no truth in it. And if you look up that word devil in the original Greek, it means evil, it means accuser. And I think it's useful to see that, to really understand what Jesus is getting at, that evil in any form has no truth in it, is a lie. Now, if something has no truth in it or underpinning it, it has no basis in reality, and it has no leg to stand on, so to speak. Mary Baker Eddy says that evil lasts only as long as the belief in it lasts. But it's not about ignoring evil. It's not about ignoring bad situations. Christian Science actually helps us bring the spiritual counterfact about God, about man, into contact with that lie or that belief in a way that is not at all ignoring it, but facing it, seeing it for what it is, and overcoming it as a lie. In fact, she says to one of her students along these lines, she says, to run before a lie, meaning to run away from a lie, is actually to accept it, to accept its terms. She says, this works like running before the enemy in battle. You will be followed, pursued, till you face about. Trust God and stand on spirit, facing and fighting, denying all claims, in whatever form those claims or false beliefs, that evil is presenting itself. So we're not running away from it. We're not ignoring it. We're not just taking a positive look or a positive spin. We're seeing it. We're seeing whatever that evil or inharmony is presenting itself as. We're seeing it for what it is, a lie with no truth in it. And we're bringing the spiritual counterfact about the nature of God, about the nature of man, into contact with it. And when that happens, that lie is broken, has no substance to stand on, and it falls away. Well, Mary Baker Eddy, she makes a statement here. She says, human sense may well marvel at discord, while to a diviner sense, harmony is the real, and discord is the unreal. Probably all of us have had times where, we've felt the human mind get wrapped up into some inharmony, discord, caught up in something going on. But she's saying it's that diviner sense that recognizes what is real, what is true, what is right. That diviner sense she's speaking of, that's your spiritual sense. That's your ability to understand and discern what is right, real, and true. In fact, she refers to spiritual sense as a conscious, constant capacity to understand God. Your spiritual sense is intact. It's actually endowed within each one of you. You don't have to earn it. You can't ever lose it. It's already a part of you. But you do have the opportunity to regularly cherish it, to regularly recognize that you have it. That ability to understand God, that ability to understand what is right, real, and true. And it's important to do that. It's important to cherish that within yourself. If you've ever had a moment where you may have been feeling that, some of these spiritual concepts are just a little bit too out there, a little bit too hard to understand or to feel connected with, or maybe you felt that maybe God was just too mysterious, too unknowable, I would take a moment, pause, take a moment right there to cherish your spiritual sense, your natural ability to understand good, to understand what is right, ultimately to understand God. But we don't have to stop there. We can take it one step further and see that and recognize it within each other. Imagine the impact that kind of prayer, that simple prayer, can have on bringing out or illustrating the harmony that's already the established fact in our communities. Instead of feeling a slight or maybe getting disturbed, letting the human mind get disturbed over something that's going on in the community or that we're reading about or watching on the news. If we take a moment to cherish those individuals' spiritual sense, that can have a profound impact in bringing out harmony there. And I want to share one last little experience that I had that will help illustrate this point. After I got out of the Army, I spent some time as a manager for a construction outfit. And there was a point where some of the managers had to come together and have a meeting. Now, during the meeting, two of the guys started just kind of gently poking at each other, which began to escalate over the course of the meeting and ended up being quite a distraction. These guys started getting more fired up, more aggressive in their language towards each other. And pretty soon they're standing up, they're out of their chairs, and they're squared off. And it looked like they were actually going to get into a physical fight. Now, normally I probably would have been the guy to jump up and try to physically separate the two of them. But I really felt compelled at this moment to stay in my seat and to really just cherish their spiritual sense, that they were drawn to good. And I've been involved in a number of different forms of conflict resolution over the years, and I really felt that this prayer was going to be the most effective means of conflict resolution for this particular scenario. And as I was sitting there and these guys were, about to battle it out, it occurred to me that what I was seeing was a little bit like watching two actors in a play. This wasn't their true nature, their true character, this aggressiveness, this anger, this frustration, this unyielding demeanor. It wasn't their true nature or their character. And I thought, I see that. But not only do I see it, they see it in themselves and in each other. And I kid you not, as soon as that thought came across my consciousness, the room went totally silent. In mid-verbal assault on each other, they went completely silent. They kept staring at each other intently for a moment, and then they peeled away and went to their respective offices. I followed my friend Eric in, and by the time I got into the office where he was already seated down. He was kind of slumped down in the chair. He looked confused, tired. And I was just going to try to encourage him a little bit. And before I had a chance to say anything, he looked at me and said, "Man, I have no idea what just happened there. I thought for sure we were going to get into a fight." And he looked at me and said, "Were you praying?" And I was actually floored. I thought, how did he know that? And I realized later he must have been feeling what I was feeling. We must have all felt that Christ influence, that divine influence, revealing our true nature. And that's what he was responding to. That's what they both must have been responding to. Well, I shared with him just very briefly that it was so natural for him to express humility, to express grace, that those were qualities that were so natural to him. We had to go back and finish the meeting that we were in. And I say, when these two guys initially, we came back into the room, and when they first saw each other, there was a moment that it looked like things might flare back up. The postures got real aggressive again. Nothing was said, but you could see that they were dealing with something. And I remember just kind of mentally putting my foot down. I didn't say anything. I just mentally thought, we have already seen and felt the law of harmony in action. And we are not going backwards here. There's a spot in Mrs. Eddy's writings where she says we can mentally insist that harmony is the fact. That's not a hope. That's not a suggestion. That is a mental insistence that harmony is the fact. Now, that little moment just lasted for a moment, and their postures returned to normal, and we had the remainder of the meeting in total harmony. But more interesting, I think, than that even, was that their characters seemed to have shifted. In fact, the whole atmosphere of the job site from that point forward was more harmonious. And it just gave me such a wonderful glimpse into how we can have an impact in our communities through the simple act of recognizing and cherishing each other's spiritual sense, that innate ability to understand and be drawn to good. I hope that as we depart this afternoon, you're just feeling something of that reign of harmony that Jesus said is within you, that kingdom of heaven at hand, right here and now, not something that we slip into or fall out of, but the present reality, the law of God that's written into each one of your hearts. Thank you all for being here this afternoon.